the goals of aggressive American clients, Israel and Turkey, will, of necessity, I think, bring Israel and Iran into conflict, and potentially Turkey as well, in a way that Russia will have to respond to. And it begins to look like 1914, and the U.S. has no control over any of this.
This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius. Germanicus is here. Gracchi brothers are coming later in the program. Right now, we're by the Thames, drinking our cup of wine, headed to the theater later, and reflecting upon events in the 21st century that are surprising. Over the course of these last years, Germanicus and I have identified the direction. We're not making predictions, just the direction of events. We had identified the direction of the Ukraine war. We had identified the direction of the Israeli defense of itself from the attack by Iran. We had identified the direction of President Trump. What we didn't know and couldn't have possibly anticipated, but now that it's upon us must deal with, is the speed that these things have happened. Not months, not weeks, hours. An event at Notre Dame these last days illustrates. In attendance at the invitation of President Macron was Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Trump and other dignitaries to attend the rededication of Notre Dame that was badly burned 5 years ago and has now been restored to what critics are saying is as if it was just built. Wonderful. Mr. Trump and Mr. Macron sat next to each other in the front row. Before and after the event, there was a photograph of Mr. Zelensky, Mr. Macron, and Mr. Trump conferring happily, smiling for the cameras. They're said to have met privately. And the result is Mr. Zelensky's comment was, I agree with Donald Trump, President-elect Trump. The war must end. So, Germanicus, I come to you. That is where you've been guiding us for some time. But the speed of this, did Mr. Zelensky just surrender to Donald Trump, who said that he would end the war in the first 24 hours of his presidency? Good evening to you.
Good evening, Gaius. This wasn't a surrender. It was a ritual prostration, much as a Roman emperor would expect, especially by the time you get after Diocletian into more Byzantine Roman times, where prostration was the appropriate way to greet a basileus. Now, Trump has not done this all on his own. I mean, the authority Trump has that is vested in him, that in fact radiates from him, is very much his doing, but in a very perverse and supremely ironic way. The power and authority that Trump marshals right now in his effect on foreign leaders and in fact on audiences worldwide is in many ways a gift of the previous administration. In large part, this is true for two reasons. First, Blue and the previous administration had no real understanding of ceremony and the criticality of ceremony in reinforcing and extending authority, establishing legitimacy, creating thus from both power. And so they blew it again and again and again from their very accession to the office, to the administration in 2021. But this was all amplified to an unimaginable degree by the fecklessness and mental pusillanimity and immobilization of the emperor himself, an emperor who could never manage to muster the kind of authority in any ceremonial format, in any ritual venue that is required of an emperor. He seemed always to come up short. And in the latter years of this administration, it was embarrassing. It was pathetic. It was shameful because whatever you think of America, that is you meaning the rest of the world, and there are many angry um, senses of what America is. You still believe America to be a great, powerful instrument of history, and you could not believe that with the former president. So Trump was essentially given a great gift because he understands ceremony, he understands ritual, he knows what it is to create authority, and he's done that for decades. And so he had the extra wind at his sails of this collapsing Biden administration, and therefore he is able in the few weeks before his inauguration to take full advantage of this obvious shift, this obvious alternation, this incredible contrast between a lost American leadership, a prostrate emperor, and a new powerful emperor. So he has extra powers, what I'm saying, beyond even that which has been given to him by his victory and by his heroic situation, the attempted assassination attempts at all. He is now in a position of enormous stature in the minds of the world, the collective mind of the world, if you will. And so he has the opportunity in the period before he takes the oath of office to actually make things happen. And he's clearly doing that. And he went to
The,
Notre Dame.
the
Yes,
administration is sending money as fast as it can, we're told. This
yes,
administration
yes,
sending
it is.
weapons as fast as it can, sending anti-personnel mines. All that is for combat at some point in the future. Mr. Zelensky doesn't indicate that any of that is useful to him. I agree with Donald Trump. The war must end. That is not the discord doesn't do it. I mean, these are not the same universes.
Well, there's a desperate attempt to shore up Ukraine by the outgoing administration so that it can survive a little bit longer. But no one is fooled by that. Ukraine has lost the war. Russia is on the cusp of a great victory, and Zelensky is in a position where his entire future, his actual physical fate as a human being, is in the hands of the new American president. So of course, he is going to prostrate himself in good Byzantine fashion before the new emperor. And this is actually arguably a very good thing because it means that the president can move quickly to resolve the war and end it. And he
Really, really quickly, Germanicus.
Well,
Really,
that's what he promises, but that is what everyone actually wants, including Russia. And he is in a position to do it magisterially because he has all of the authority of collective worldwide expectation. This is a really remarkable position for any a leader to be in. And so he should take full advantage of it. But of course, in order to make it work, he has to totally understand how to make the settlement a complete and final resolution of the relationship of
this is
Ukraine and Russia.
then Zelensky is accepting
Well, Zelensky has no choice. Yeah.
Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast to Russia, all the complete, not partial, complete. Crimea to Russia, no NATO for the rump of Ukraine.
And militarization.
Is
Yeah,
that is that what Zelensky means when he says, "I agree with the president"?
well, that's what Zelensky will accept.
Right.
He's signaled that he'll accept whatever Trump allows. Well, that means that let's look to our own times across the expanse of Roman and Byzantine history when a when an ally is defeated, you embrace that ally. You give them a nice villa in your empire, and even your enemies. You do the same thing when Belisarius vanquished the Vandals in 535. Justinian gave the Vandal leader a villa and accommodated all the aristocrats because that's the thing to do. And I think Zelensky now understands that the best personal outcome for him and his family is to find a space in the West, much as, I have to say, much as Assad has just received from Mr. Putin in Moscow a few hours ago. So this is the way of the world. And the point is that the authority that
One minute, Germanicus. Go ahead.
the authority that Mr. Trump has been enhanced by the failures and pusillanimity of his predecessors. So Trump is in a very strong position now to move quickly, as long as he does so in a way that achieves a full resolution. And you will notice that all of the opposition from the old neocons and the "we want to fight Russia forever" types among blue has been, oh, let's have a ceasefire, let's freeze everything, let's have a neutral zone, and of course, let's arm up Ukraine to the teeth. Well, Mr. Putin won't accept that, and neither will the entirety of the Russian people. And so I would hope that Mr. Trump understands that, and that a full settlement, whatever its specific contours, will take into account the fact that this is over. No NATO membership for Ukraine, no remilitarization, a somewhat reasonable frontier and geographic settlement that takes into account all of the Russian areas of the Donbass, which you mentioned, all those four oblasts in Crimea. I think that's probably what will happen if everybody keeps their head and if Mr. Trump keeps his eye on the prize. And the prize for him is to be able to bring the terrible World War I like battle to an end. And it's somewhat resonant, if I could, to Mr. Reagan when he took the oath. That very moment he was taking the oath, the hostages were released. Why were they released? Well, it was this incredible authority that he had. And I think Trump bears that same mark of authority. So we can hope that this is a prospective outcome.
Acknowledging the accelerating events in ways that we had not anticipated. This time it's the Middle East. Israel's been at war for more than a year with elements of Iran's surrogates, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the IRGC parked in Syria with its sponsorship by Bashar al-Assad, who's been in charge of Syria since 2000. Well, the news is Assad has fled. And the capital, Damascus, the news is, has been invested by a hodgepodge of jihadists, led by a man named Jalani, Abu Muhammad Jalani, who is al-Qaeda. He is not presenting himself as anything but a new and reformed version of al-Qaeda, a man who sees the world in geopolitical terms and not theological terms. Fine. In other words, the tagger is saying it changed its stripes. However, he's also representative of ISIS. He's representative of the Free Syrian Army. He's represented by a library of acronyms and ambitions out of Idlib province. He's also sponsored in some fashion, those are Turkish army trucks that he's driving, by Erdogan in Ankara and Istanbul. What we're looking at here is the Roman province of Syria, Armenia, Mesopotamia, Syria, Arabia, and Lower Egypt were our 5 provinces. And Syria, the largest of them, included Palestine, included Jerusalem, included Ashkelon, Many of the major cities you see now certainly included Gaza. That has been at war for more than a year. Syria has not been at war for some time, we believed, but it is now going to be transformed into the hands of anarchy. After governments collapse, you don't get suddenly a legislature passing new laws. What you get is gunmen on the streets and a sense of disorder. Germanicus, we've got to deal with this in the way the Romans would deal with it first. I'll just mention, not for you to waste time with it. What we would do is send one or two legions out, or if they're already stationed there, we'd organize them, and we'd kill everybody who disobeyed us. That's what we'd do.
Right.
And then we'd call in the governor, who clearly did a bad job. He's still too big because his province fell apart. And we'd send out another governor. And within a year, everything had calmed down. How is the West going to deal with Syria in anarchy?
We may think of America as Rome, and in many ways, that's a useful analogy. However, the situation in Syria, I believe, is more comparable to that in the Balkans in 1912 and 1913 before World War One. Now, Roman times, the Syrian Mesopotamian frontier was a face-off between two pretty much equal superpowers, Rome and Persia. But what you had in the early 20th century in the Balkans was an Ottoman empire that had been dominant for 500 years coming apart. And you had all of these restless and aggressive local powers. Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, they wanted pieces of their patrimony as they saw it, and they were willing to fight for it again and again and again. And that is one thing. But then you also had the great powers, Britain, Russia, Germany, Austria, Hungary, that all had their fingers in manipulating this battle between um, restless Christian states and the Ottoman Empire. And the result was that you had a war in which that was actually two wars that lasted for 9 months between October 1912 and August 1913, in which Turkey was really brought to the brink of collapse. And the possibility of Balkan states staying together in a united front was broken. And in many ways, the result was that that all of the meddling of foreign powers, where Britain was supporting the Ottomans historically, where Russia wanted to bring down the Ottoman Empire and was supporting the Balkan League of Bulgaria, Greece, and Serbia, and where Austria-Hungary needed to have the Ottoman Empire survive so that it could maintain its recent takeover of Bosnia Herzegovina. All of that went down the tubes. And as a result, the outcome of this regional war, which is very much like the regional war that we're seeing in Syria, led to the great European powers being at the mercy of their client states. In other words, Russia was now dependent on Serbia. It was its last remaining ally. Austria-Hungary was fearful that the Ottoman Empire would come apart and they'd be exposed to Serbian revanchism, and they were dependent on Germany. Bulgaria turned to Germany. It was a mess, but it was not resolved. In other words, the Balkan War fueled irredentism and revanchism among the states of the Balkans. And that drew in the European powers that were already in a very difficult competition. So let's look at what was happening in Europe before World War One. There were blocs emerging. There was the Entente Cordiale and the Russo-French alliance. So you had three great powers that were connected to take on another two great powers, Austria-Hungary and Germany, in another alliance system. And the result was the wars in the Balkans created a situation where the great powers were at the mercy of feckless and aggressive and relentless local powers, Serbia, Bulgaria, uh, Greece, and that led to a situation only a year after the Balkan Wars ended, led to World War One. It only took the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but the fact is that the great powers were already at the mercy and a hair trigger way of their own clients. And so if you look at the situation today, the US seems to have benefited from the collapse of Syria, which was always part of its policy. But it is at the mercy of Turkey and Israel, who have enormously reckless expansionist goals. And Russia, which seems to be defeated, and Iran, of course, is now totally dependent on Russia, but Russia's on the hook with Iran. And the way in which this has come down is that the goals of aggressive American clients, Israel and Turkey, will, of necessity, I think, bring Israel and Iran into conflict, and potentially Turkey as well, in a way that Russia will have to respond to. And it begins to look like 1914, and the U.S. has no control over any of this.
Mr. Trump says he's not going to get involved in Syria. Do you believe it?
He was involved in Syria when he was president the first
Yes,
time.
but I'm just saying what he said at the cathedral in Paris.
The
Uh,
U.S. has a large stake in Syria. If you look at any current map, it's about half the size of Belgium, maybe bigger. It's a big chunk of land adjacent to northern Jordan. And Israel is carving out a sphere now beyond the Golan Heights, and Israel wants to create a corridor to connect up with the Kurds. And of course, the Kurds and Israel together will eventually come to loggerheads with Turkey, because Turkey it wants to destroy the Kurds and incorporate them into a greater Turkey. So you've got incredible dynamics going on here. And if you look back to the Balkan Wars,
All right.
one of the interesting things that happened there was you had Bulgaria, Montenegro, Serbia, and Greece gang up against Turkey. But when they defeated Turkey, um, Bulgaria went to war with the other participants. So I wouldn't think that any of this is done. Once the dust is settled, you're going to see new conflicts in ways that do not reflect what happened before. In other words,
France get drawn in. France, Syria and Lebanon are their mandate. Do you see France getting drawn in? That would mean NATO.
well, France could get drawn in a kind of symbolic, you know, petit way. I mean, the European states today are not powers anymore. They have very little that they can do or bring to bear. And of course, even Russia is constrained. What I would see, though, potentially, is a major regional war involving Israel, Turkey, and Iran. And it's going to be a big problem for the United States. It will also be for
Does
Russia.
Russia stay out of that, or does Russia get drawn in?
It really depends. If Russia is able to bring the Ukrainian war to a swift conclusion, it'll have more capability at its disposal. But if there is a war between Iran and Israel, it is not possible for China and Russia to stay out of that
What's the
because
timeline, Germanicus? Because we've just seen the timeline accelerate
it
in the
has. And there'll be a break now, and then within months, things will gear up again. Turkey, Turkey cannot be the ruler of Syria, and Israel has its own claims. They will use the Druze as an excuse to push up into Syria and link up with the Kurds. I foresee a major multiple conflicts flowing from what has just happened.
Germanicus and I have to get on to the theater. I'm Gaius. But it was an irony these last years that Mr. Trump, his campaign, his presidency, his defeat in 20, and now his success in 24, has been treated as an outsider, as a disruptor, as a threat to the established order, especially as a threat to the Senate, the optimates, though Mr. Trump is one of them. And though Mr. Trump has been generous towards all of them in their coffers over the years, rejecting him as an invader. And Germanicus and I have discussed this for some time and settled on the understanding that Mr. Trump represents a younger version of the Gracchi, two brothers who were torn apart by the mobs. This is before Caesar, in the end of the 2nd century BCE and the beginning of the 1st century BCE, torn apart by the mobs because they proposed reforms, chiefly in terms of taking property away from the optimates and distributing it to the plebes. Well, that is upsetting to the Senate, whether it's 2,000 years ago, sitting with Cicero, or whether it's right now, waiting for the new Senate to convene. After the presidency of one of their number, two of their numbers actually, President Biden and Vice President Harris. And Mr. Trump is upsetting them again. The Gracchi have now got control of the White House again. However, Germanicus, I don't want to be optimistic. I just saw something, though, in that Notre Dame ceremony that struck me as unusual because it doesn't make any noise. It just sits there. All of a sudden, this younger version of the Gracchi, this younger Gracchus brother, is being normalized. Welcomed by President Macron, applauded, meeting with the heir apparent of the English crown, the Prince of Wales. His father could not attend, health reasons, we're told, and the Prince of Wales attended, representing Great Britain. And Mr. Trump greeted him. They were clearly enjoying each other's company, and they went back to the British embassy and sat for a while for photographs. These photographs were extolled as breakthrough diplomacy in London, and I think they are. Certainly, the optimates of the Senate looked at those photographs and said, "Oh my goodness, what are we going to do now?" Well, Germanicus, we have just a couple of minutes. What are they going to do? Are they going to accept that Mr. Trump is being normalized by our kindred in Europe?
The Gracchi analogy that you have invoked in several of our conversations is very powerful in the sense that the Gracchi were a prefiguration in their own way of the need for leadership in a republic that favored a class, the optimates, over the people. And the only way in which the people could gain a voice was through a big leader. And that big leader, of course, beginning with Marius and then Sulla and then the first triumvirate, and then finally, after Caesar, with the emperor system of Augustus, was the only way to kind of break that logjam where there would be some voice for the people. It couldn't be done in the earlier constitution of the Roman Republic. Hence, both Gracchi brothers were brutally murdered. And what is happening now is the accession of a big man, a kind of a Caesar, not with without restraint, but nonetheless, it takes an older man who has endured the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune over all these years, having endured them, having weathered them, having withstood them, having, in fact, shaken them off his back, has given him a powerful authority. And this gets back in many ways to what I was saying about the gift of Mr. Biden. And that is all of the attacks on Trump not only made him stronger, they elevated him. In fact, it was it was the Democrats who made Mr. Trump the hero that he is. They made him the person that the world admired, and most of all, that Americans acclaim today. And therefore, what we're seeing is the outcome of a relentless domestic struggle. And that struggle, in every element of its playing out, not only worked to Mr. Trump's advantage, but made him the larger than life figure that he is today. And so that is, again, another irony of history, but it does speak to the need. If you're going to have someone who represents the people, he cannot be easily assassinated like the Gracchi brothers. He has to be able to withstand the attacks of a class that is not only entrenched, but is desperate to maintain their perks and their power forever. And therefore, a struggle is required. And
Is
that
it
struggle has happened.
is it significant that Europe is embracing Trump while the American version of the elite are holding back? Is that significant, or is that something that was always there? Europe was always ready to admire him.
It's significantly telling because the situation of Europe's aristocratic class is fundamentally different from that of the American optimates, because Europe is a vassal of the United States. And so the European aristocracy can see that in order for them to survive at all, they have to get on their knees. And essentially they are.
And this is this happy turn. Can we expect the normalization to be accepted, or will there be another 4 years of resistance?
It's not happened yet. However, I would refer back to 1980, quite
Yeah, yeah.
a while ago. But everyone, the optimates were out to the knives were out for Reagan. But the manner in which he achieved victory, and then his incredible behavior as a guy who knew ceremony. Obviously, from Hollywood, he understood all of that. And he took the center stage, and they had to exceed.
Germanicus and I are going to get on to the theater. We sacrificed to Augustus, who calmed down everybody when he took control and invented the emperor. And we're going to go to a full version of Assemblywomen. This is Aristophanes. I looked it up, 391 BCE. It's a comedy for Greeks. It's a Greek version of a comedy. It turns on the women of Athens putting on beards and pretending to be men and charging into the assembly, which only permits men to speak, and saying they want to create what we would understand now to be the perfect socialist state. No property is owned. It's all common property. And if you need money, you go and draw it out of the bank. And everybody has the same food every day and lives in a house that's built by the state and gets health care. And you can marry and you can be a philanderer, but you've got to philander with the ugly women or the ugly men, not the most beautiful. It's a comedy in the Greek style. What is striking about it is that it is picked up again by the philosophers of the late 18th century in France who become the levelers, and then picked up again by Marx and Engels, and what followed them, Lenin and Stalin, into the 20th century and now the 21st century. So the Greeks regarded it as a comedy. We, of course, are not ready to laugh all the time, are we, Germanicus? Sometimes.
Sic transit ergo gloria woke.
Yes, we think it's funny, but only after we've escaped its net. Germanicus is Michael Vlahos. I am John Batchelor Gaius. Thank you.